This is a closer look with the Monitor on Prairie Public. I'm Craig Blumenshine. Voting rights can seem straightforward, but for many North Dakotans with felony convictions, the rules are anything but clear. A new effort is underway to correct widespread misunderstandings about who is and who isn't eligible to vote. In a recent story in the North Dakota Monitor, reporter Mary Stoyer looked at how confusion persists even though state laws allow many people with felony records to cast a ballot once they're no longer incarcerated. Mary joins us now to walk through what the law says, why the confusion matters, and what's being done to address it. Mary, welcome back to A Closer Look with the Monitor.
Thank you. Hello.
Mary, at the center of your reporting is a pretty basic question. Can felons vote in North Dakota? What does the law actually say, and where do people most often get it wrong?
First, yes, felons can vote in North Dakota as long as they're not currently incarcerated for a felony. So if someone has a felony and they're on probation or parole, or, if they have a felony from 10 years ago and they're not currently in prison or anything, they can vote. This also means that if someone's in jail but they haven't been convicted, or if they're incarcerated for a misdemeanor, in those cases they can also vote. As for the other part of your question, I heard from people I've spoken with that a lot of people think maybe they can't vote in federal elections if they have a felony on their record, or they think they can't vote at all with a felony. And a lot of people probably also don't realize that if you're in jail for a misdemeanor, you generally can vote too.
So what you're saying, Mary, if I've been arrested for a crime, but I've not yet went to trial, even if that crime is a felony, I still have a right to vote?
Yep.
How does North Dakota compare to other states, Mary, if you know, when it comes to restoring voting rights after a felony conviction?
From what I can tell, and I found this map from the Brennan Center that says it was updated last in 2025, so I'm hoping the information there is still current. It looks like about half of states, maybe a little less than that, are similar to North Dakota in that you can vote if you have a felony on your record as long as you're not still serving time for that felony. But there are a lot of states where you don't get that right back until you've also served probation or parole. And there are some states, a smaller group of states, where you don't automatically get those rights back at all. I found on the map that in Virginia, for example, if you have a felony, you lose your right to vote unless the governor takes action. And so the way it looks like things are now is that the governor, you have to apply to the governor's office to get your voting rights back after you've served time for a felony. So across the country, it seems like there's a broad spectrum.
So, Mary, then I think what you're saying is that's why these misunderstandings persist in North Dakota. There perhaps is communication failure. It's legally complex in some instances, or maybe even something deeper about how people think about punishment and civil rights, maybe?
It certainly could be the case. I think most people don't have felonies on their records. The other thing is most people don't understand voting laws. I mean, for example, I didn't know the nuances of this until I worked on this story. And I think if you had asked me, I maybe would have assumed if you have a felony on your record, you can still vote. But I probably wouldn't have guessed that if you're in jail for a misdemeanor, you usually can also still vote. And so it's kind of a complicated situation. And most people probably don't really think about the nuance between what's the difference between jail and prison or probation and parole, things like that. It's complicated.
Mary, did you find evidence that eligible voters are not voting simply because they think they're not allowed to?
Anecdotally, yes. I spoke with Whitney Oxendahl from the League of Women Voters of North Dakota, and she said that volunteers with the organization, when they've been out talking to people in the community, they meet a lot of people who say, oh, I have a felony, so that means I can't vote, right? And so they seem to have a misunderstanding there. She also said that volunteers had encountered people at the polls when they were there to observe the elections who seemed to be under the impression that they couldn't vote in federal elections. So there's not like comprehensive research in North Dakota on this issue, but that's what people seem to be saying, that people have this preconceived notion about how their rights might be limited, and that keeps them from engaging.
Mary, are state agencies or correctional facilities here in North Dakota involved in any efforts to communicate better on who can and can't vote?
The League of Women Voters had started this initiative to try to get kind of a more coordinated effort to get information about voting rights for people with criminal records out there. And one thing that they've done is they asked the Secretary of State's office to put together a new fact sheet specifically for people in the situation. So they kind of have one place to look to find out, you know, what are my circumstances and how does that affect my ability to vote, if it does. And then another thing that they've done, I spoke with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and they've put that fact sheet on. Prisoners get like a personal tablet. It's not connected to the internet, but like the resource was put on there for them. And I know the league had a booth at a little event for people who are re-entering the community in a time during their sentence when they're getting ready to be released. And so they've tried to sort of like, it seems like the state and then this organization is trying to do different things to kind of make it easier for people to find out about this.
I wonder whether these groups face distrust of people they're trying to help, that continue to the feeling of disengagement, especially from the political process.
What I kind of heard was you can make the information available, but ultimately it's someone's choice whether or not to vote or not, right? I didn't hear anything specific about necessarily distrust, although it's hard to imagine that not playing a role. But I think for a lot of people in this situation, like if you're incarcerated or recently released, you probably don't have an easy life. You probably don't have a lot of time on your hands. So there are other barriers to voting besides a lack of information. So it may still be difficult for them to make the time to vote or think about voting if that's an option for them, or to think that it's worth their time. And I guess that's true for the general public more broadly, right? Like you can educate someone about civics, but for a lot of the general population, getting involved in actually voting is not happening. So I'm sure that does make a big difference.
You can talk about legal eligibility, and then you can talk about participation. And so there really are broader consequences, maybe even for folks who have felonies who can vote but don't. Are there broader consequences when eligible voters don't realize that they can vote?
I would say the consequence is probably just that they won't be represented. And thinking about all the different ways that the state makes decisions that affect people in this situation, I mean, like we're always hearing officials talk about how much do we invest in the prison system, what money do we put toward like behavioral health programs, etc. What do we criminalize? What's the right punishment to assign to a specific crime? Things like that. If you're not voting in the general election or the primary, then your voice isn't part of the pool that's deciding who's making these decisions. And so by extension, like this group of people may not be equally represented. That has kind of like a ripple effect where there are decisions being made about these people, but their voice may not be a part of it.
I'm enjoying my conversation with Mary Stoyer. She's a reporter with the North Dakota Monitor, and this is a closer look with the Monitor. We're talking about what the law actually says on whether felons can vote here in North Dakota and what confusion exists about that issue. Mary, did your reporting surface any debate or even disagreement about whether voting rights should be restored after incarceration or should be removed after incarceration? As you said earlier, some states don't allow felons to vote. Or is this just an issue here more about awareness rather than policy?
I think that's a really interesting question. I didn't hear anyone who wanted to go in the other direction, like be more restrictive. Um, Although I guess if anyone does have that opinion, I'd be interested to hear from them. But I think most of the people I talk to seem to be like really proud that North Dakota is part of the group of states that gives people's rights back with fewer limitations. It's quicker to restore these rights compared to other states in the nation.
Mary, if someone's listening and they're not sure about whether they're eligible to vote in North Dakota, what's the best advice?
So the fact sheet I referenced is on the Secretary of State's website. There's a lot of information on there, and so sometimes it's hard to find exactly like what you're looking for. But I looked it up, and it is under, if you go to elections and then voter and then voting in ND, then voter resources, then it's in a list of resources on that page. And they also have other fact sheets for people in other circumstances, like if you're a college student, if you're homeless, if you're living in long-term care facilities, if you're a tribal member, they have specific fact sheets that talk about those circumstances too. So there's a lot of different things there for people in different situations that they might find helpful.
And I'm sure people can call their local county clerk's offices too if they have any questions, or certainly could call the Secretary of State's office directly. Well, Mary, this is an interesting issue. This is Mary Stoyer. She's a reporter for the North Dakota Monitor, a place where you can get a lot of news about our state, free from paywalls, free from having required subscriptions. Mary, your reporting makes clear that North Dakota, many people with felonies can regain their right to vote once they're no longer incarcerated, but that confusion still does exist, and we hope maybe we've dealt with a little of that here. You can read Mary's reporting and all of her colleagues' reporting at the North Dakota Monitor website, northdakotamonitor.com. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
For a closer look with the Monitor, I'm Craig Blumenshine.